studios of WDBO in sunny Orlando, Florida, here's talk radio host Joe Kelly's Behind the News podcast, where Joe and his listeners and guests discuss the most important issues of the day, plus the crazy and bizarre stories of the infamous Florida man. Here's Joe Kelly.
This is a special edition of Orlando's News and Talk with Joe Kelly on WDBO. Donald Trump arraigned.
My name is Joe Kelly, and this, of course, is a historic day today in the United States, as for the first time ever, a sitting president or former president, either one, is indicted and arraigned on multiple counts, 34 counts. In this case, out of Lower Manhattan in New York City. This as President Trump is currently en route. He's in the air right now, flying back from New York to South Florida. And I want to start our live team coverage in South Florida, where Channel 9 Eyewitness News reporter Nick Papantonis joins us. And Nick, kind of set the stage for us as to where you are right now in anticipation for President Trump's address to supporters and to the nation later tonight.
So I just stepped outside of the main ballroom here at Mar-A-Lago. This is the room where the president is expected to address what appears to be hundreds of supporters that have already started to file into the room. About 8:15, as you were saying, this is, as we know, is his home. This is the place where he is most comfortable, and this is going to be a very, very packed crowd here to see him in just a couple of hours.
Nick, I'm curious as to the exact identity of the people that are allowed into Mar-A-Lago to be a part of this. I would imagine they're a who's who list of supporters and contributors.
I think right now the who's who part of it is still a TBD. There's a bunch of seats kind of towards the front that remain empty, presumably for those higher profile people. Right now, the people that are being filed in are towards the back of the room in the standing section. And those appear to be a range of different types of individuals. The ones I've been able to pick out so far appear to be a biker group that has their logos displayed on their jackets, a number of either South Korean possibly or Japanese supporters are also here. Seeing some of the TV stations that are from that region of the world, kind of paying attention to them. And then there's just a lot of, again, mix of people, all kind of dressed to the nines, wearing their red hats, just here to hear his remarks. It
was noted by some pundits earlier today, Nick, that none of the Trump family members were with the president in Manhattan when he was being arraigned. Have you seen any of the family members down there at Mar-A-Lago?
Not so far. Again, those higher-profile individuals we expect to see later on. I've been keeping an eye out for some faces that might be familiar to me as a journalist. So far, though, everybody is of that caliber is not in the room right now. We don't know what this president's schedule is going to be in between when he lands, presumably within the next 30 minutes or so, and then when he actually takes the stage. We don't know if he's planning on meeting privately with his family or with those higher-profile supporters. That's going to be decided, as well as the topic of his speech. Obviously, we're waiting to see how much he goes into what happened today, how much he attacks that case that's being made against him right now. We don't know how far he plans on taking things. He tries to show that he's in command right now.
We're talking to Channel 9 Eyewitness News reporter Nick Papantonis, who is at Mar-A-Lago down in Palm Beach right now, and the president is already posting multiple posts on his Truth Social, writing that he just lifted off for Palm Beach, Florida. Will be delivering remarks tonight at 8:15 p.m. Eastern. The hearing, he writes, was shocking to many in that they had no surprises and therefore no case. Virtually every legal pundit has said that there is no case here. There was nothing done illegally. Quite clearly, as I know that you're covering it, the story down there in Palm Beach and not necessarily following what happened in Manhattan, but quite clearly the judge did not issue a gag order tonight. So this could be a Trump speech in classic Trumpiness, as he could well go clear off script.
Yeah, I understand just from following some of those New York reports that he was warned about his post, but that is right. There is no gag order right now, and that's something we were waiting on to see as we stood outside here today waiting to be let into this event. And we didn't know if there was a gag order, how would that affect his remarks? We didn't know if that would cancel the event altogether or just force him to kind of play inside the lines of what the court had done. Obviously, that's not the case tonight. And so, again, how far does he take things? This, is very likely to be some sort of speech that we're all familiar with. Again, those usual rallying points, but given the president's history, we do expect a number of comments to be made that are in reaction to what happened today and what's been happening over the last couple of days. So that's something that we're going to be paying attention to.
And if reports are to be believed, the president in the last 3 days has raised some $10 million in campaign contributions based solely on the indictments. And I would imagine that the president would use the opportunity tonight to also try to reach some potential donors and say that this is going to be a potentially long and expensive fight.
That's already been on display. When you guys turn on the TV tonight, you'll see probably a couple of screens flanking the president using that Make America Great Again slogan, as well as the text Trump to the certain phone number that has been on display. So it's all clearly going to be part fundraising event, part consolidation of control, and just a part of trying to lock down this Republican base before the primary even really begins. Lastly
for you, Nick, and I know you got a busy night ahead of you, do you get any sense for how long the speech is going to be tonight?
That is another TBD on our end. Obviously, our schedules will be dictated by that. The president has been known to speak for 45 minutes to an hour at a time, especially when he chooses to not stick to any particular type of script. So we will be looking to see what we're in for, essentially.
Outstanding report. That is Channel 9 Eyewitness News reporter Nick Papantonis, who is down in South Florida now at Mar-A-Lago to cover the president's speech there tonight. Nick, as always, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I know our listeners really appreciate his contributions and taking us there to the scene. Coming up next here on WDBO, we're going to check in with one of our legal analysts to get his perspective on the events of today and what happens next. In the meantime, you can call 844-580-WDBO. It's 844-580-9326. You can use the open mic and the WDBO app. Do you think it is time for Donald Trump to kind of, kick it in low gear and say, let me focus on my legal troubles, we'll step aside from the political race? Or do you think it is time for Trump to really dig in, to really lean in on this presidential campaign? Because if polling and fundraising are an indicator, it seems to be working really, really well for Donald Trump, at least so far. Let us know in the open mic or hit us up at 844-580-WDBO.
I think Trump just needs to lay it all on the line and start bringing out all the stuff that the past Dems have done, all these little secrets. It's time to open the doors and the floodgates and retaliate.
That may well be up the president's sleeves tonight as he addresses the nation at 8:15 from Mar-A-Lago. I am told, by the way, that at least it looked like him, but it looked like Mike Lindell from My Pillow fame is there at Mar-A-Lago, ready to watch the president's address to the nation tonight. My name is Joe Kelly. It's at Talk Radio Joe. You can always find the podcast anywhere you get your podcast. Just look for Behind the News with Joe Kelly. It's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and elsewhere. When I was in college, I only took one legal class in college, and that was broadcast law. And I'll be honest with you, it was probably my absolute favorite class in all of college, and it's probably one of the few classes that I still recall. But that was the only law class I took. So I have to defer to a real lawyer with real legal expertise as we break down some of what we learned today. So I'd like to welcome to our show Moses DeWitt from DeWittLaw.com. Mo, how are you, buddy? It's good to hear from you.
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Joe?
I'm doing very good. Now, as I alluded, most of us only know the law skin deep at best. You know it down to the bones. We saw the accusations made against Donald Trump today. Then we saw Alvin Bragg, the DA, later in the day try to argue those charges against him. And I guess it feels like it comes down to which person do we want to believe? Because if you take Alvin Bragg all by himself and you strip away any political motivations, you strip away the fact that he campaigned on getting Donald Trump charged. If you strip all that away, it kind of sounded like what Alvin Bragg was making sense. But yet when you hear the MAGA supporters, it sounds like Alvin Bragg is completely out of his mind.
Well, and really at this point, I don't know that there's enough information out there to make an educated decision as to whether there's any teeth to these charges. I mean, we've seen the indictment, we've seen what the charges are, but we haven't seen the underlying evidence yet. Of course, the DA is going to say their case is strong and that they think the indictment is very specific and gives all the information. To me, when I reviewed the indictment, I still thought there was some key pieces of information that they left out of there that I would suspect that Trump's lawyers are probably going to file some motions on to get some more specifics as to what these charges actually contain.
By the way, if you are also a lawyer, if you're listening right now and you're a lawyer, or if you are, like me, an armchair amateur, would-be, wannabe lawyer. Either way, the indictment is posted online. It's on the WDBO website. You can just open up the WDBO app and look for the headline that has the word indictment in it, and you'll be able to read. I was a little surprised that with all the fanfare, talking about 34 counts, I was a little surprised that the indictment was only 13 pages. I mean, it was short enough that even my feeble mind was able to read through it and understand it.
Yeah, I mean, indictments usually don't have a great deal of detail in them. Typically they are just the charges and kind of the bare bones facts to those charges. This indictment, though, left out one key piece of information, which is, a part of this crime here is that he falsified these records with the intent of committing another crime. But we don't know what that other crime is. The DA has kind of alluded to that it would be some sort of federal or state campaign finance crime, but we don't actually know what that crime is at this point in time, which is going to be a crucial piece of information for not only the prosecution, but also for the defense. When,
Mo, do we learn about that crime?
Well, I would suspect Donald Trump's lawyers are probably already working on a motion to get more specific information on what crime they're alleging he was falsifying these documents to commit. Now, because obviously this all has to do with the hush money payments, essentially. But hush money payments in and of themselves are not illegal. And the key element there, with falsifying records with the intent of committing another crime is what escalates these charges from a misdemeanor crime to a felony crime.
So that's one of the things that Donald Trump wrote in a Truth Social post while he is in the air on his way back to South Florida. And I'm just going to paraphrase part of what he wrote, but he says that Alvin Bragg is shutting down New York and spending $200 million for a totally legal $130,000 NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. I mean, do you see it the same way?
Well, that's probably an oversimplification, of course. There seems to be, if we take the DA at their word and the evidence that they have, that there was business documents at the Trump organization that were falsified. Now, that in and of itself, under New York law, could be a misdemeanor. And, of course, there's some different defenses to that. But the real question here is, how did they escalate this to a felony? What's that second crime that the falsified records were supposed to be used in? And that we don't know. So, yes, while you can pay somebody money for a non-disclosure agreement, I think there's probably a little more to it than he's letting on in that post.
We're talking to Moe DeWitt. You can check out the DeWitt Law Review. It airs Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. right here on WDBO. And you can check out more from Moe DeWitt at DeWittLaw.com. One of the things in that same post from Donald Trump about the NDA, he says, on top of that, the Ninth Circuit Court just awarded me $122,000, over $500,000 already from Stormy Horseface Daniels. And so I've got two thoughts. One, that was true what the president said, that the Ninth Circuit Court did award him more money from Stormy Daniels today. But also, would you advise your clients to avoid inflammatory language like horseface and the criticisms that he said that the judge was out to get him? And I mean, do those help or hurt a case?
Well, typically in any criminal case, we advise the defendant to keep their mouth shut because, as you know, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. So while what he's saying may not be directly relevant to the prosecution, and it certainly may not help his case, my recommendation is always to be quiet. Of course, we know Donald Trump doesn't like to do that. But yes, that would, as a lawyer, my advice would be to remain silent.
So now we're told, Mo, that the next court appearance is going to be December 4th. There is some debate as to whether or not Donald Trump is going to go, should go. If he does go, it certainly causes a lot of log jams and other problems in lower Manhattan, much like we saw today. If he doesn't go, what difference does it make if he doesn't go?
Well, typically his presence is not required there unless he has to give testimony or something along those lines, if it's an evidentiary hearing. However, typically as a criminal defendant, you have a right to be present if you want to be present. Now, like you said, logistically, it's a little more complicated in this case, and maybe he goes because he just wants to cause that logjam and make it difficult for everybody, including the court, the court themselves, the district attorney, and the court employees. But he certainly has the right to be there or not be there as long as his presence is not required by the court.
Moe DeWitt, you can check out the DeWitt Law Review. It airs Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. right here on WDBO. Find out more when you go to DeWittLaw.com. Mo, thank you so much for your expertise tonight.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
On a side note here, a couple of breaking news, a couple of strong earthquakes. One just off the coast of Panama, 6.6 magnitude earthquake. And then another in Gilroy, California, 4.5 magnitude earthquake just hit Gilroy, California. So far, no word of loss of property, loss of life, injuries or anything else like that. Gilroy, California. You guys know what Gilroy is famous for, right? The one thing that I bet Channel 9 Eyewitness News chief political correspondent Christopher Heath knows what Gilroy, California is popular for.
I can list all 67 Florida counties, cannot tell you about Gilroy.
That is the garlic capital of America, if not the world. Anytime you drive through Gilroy, just south of the San Jose area, you'd swear you're driving through like an Olive Garden restaurant. It just smells so garlicky as you drive through there. Anyhow, joining us now, Channel 9 Eyewitness News, not our chief garlic correspondent, not our chief cooking correspondent, our chief political correspondent, Christopher Heath. And Chris, today, I don't want to undersell this. I mean, today has been a day unlike no other really in American history, certainly not in modern times.
Yeah, I mean, this is something to take the full measure of it. Obviously, as we see with these kind of things, you have different people running to their corners and coming out swinging with all kinds of, accusations and this, that, and the other. And I think there's a lot of bad faith arguments on both sides of what we're seeing today. But, do take time to take the full measure of it. And, I having looked at the full breadth of what was today and also what's out there, if I was the Trump campaign or Donald Trump, I would be more worried about what's going on in Georgia and what's going on at DOJ than what's happening in Manhattan.
You're saying the other investigations that are looking into Donald Trump's behavior might be more consequential than the one in Manhattan?
Yeah, because you look at DOJ, they've got Mark Meadows, who will now testify. You've got Mike Pence, who will have to testify. If you look at Georgia, that's already gone to a grand jury. They have, obviously, his phone recording with Brad Raffensperger asking to fine him 11,000 and some votes. There's a lot more that I think it definitely has more legal exposure than this, which is, even people who I think would say, that it was wrong top to bottom to make these payments or anything, still look at this case and say it really is being shoehorned into a statute that really doesn't fit it very well.
And especially after we saw, as was alluded to in the press conference today, that other prosecutors took a look at it and said, no, thanks. But Alvin Bragg jumped in head first. But Alvin Bragg also ran for office under the promise that he would target Donald Trump.
Yeah, and this is using the situation that's basically known as tolling, and that is this idea that, certain crimes have a statute of limitations, but that statute can get suspended as long as there's an underlying crime that once you find out about that, it goes back to the previous crime. Or in this case, the fact that he was the president of the United States for 4 years, and there's a DOJ memorandum saying we don't indict sitting presidents. So do we take, those 4 years and put a pause? Even then, you've still got problems because it's only a 2-year statute of limitations on this. Unless you can kick it up to a felony, that's tenuous because you're tying it to a federal crime, which, as you mentioned, the feds already looked at and said, we're not prosecuting. So it seems as if there's 2 or 3 hoops you have to jump through just to get to where this is on solid footing. It doesn't quite seem to be there. So we'll see what happens with this one. But again, Donald Trump can afford very, very good attorneys. He will get his day in court. I would imagine right now his attorneys have drafted all sorts of motions to dismiss. They will be filed in short order.
And, we're still trying to kind of unpack the Manhattan charges and what the timeline is going to be. We know that the next court appearance is December 4th. We're told that they want this to go to trial by January 2024, which is going to put us right into the election season. And this is without having the slightest idea of the timing of the other investigations.
Yeah, and that's the next question. How quickly is Georgia looking to move on the phone call post-2020 election? The feds, the federal government, at least on the justice side, they move at whatever pace they choose to move at. They indict when they feel like indicting. They do things on their own schedule, so who knows how long that side's going to go. But definitely, the Georgia question is lingering out there, and if I were the Trump team, I would be more concerned with Georgia right now than I would be with Manhattan.
We're talking to Channel 9 Eyewitness News chief political correspondent Christopher Heath. And, of course, we're talking about the former president's courtroom appearances today in Manhattan. He's on his way. He should be landing really any minute now. In fact, he just did. He just landed at Palm Beach International Airport. Trump Force One is now on the ground. He'll be making his way back to Mar-A-Lago, where a large crowd already awaits. We heard from Nick Papantonis just a little while ago, who's down there at Mar-A-Lago, and it does appear to be a pretty packed house down there for tonight. Now, let's talk about the possibility, Chris, that Donald Trump could or will be running for president, while his trial is ongoing. I don't think, and I've heard people say, can you run for president from jail? I don't think, even if he was convicted, I don't think he would be in jail by the time that comes around. I think it's going to be dragged out long enough. But he is certainly fundraising. Reports say he's raised $10 million just since the indictment was announced. I mean, this looks like pretty good political currency at the moment.
It does. I'm going to say one thing, and I saw this the moment they put out the Trump T-shirt with his mugshot on it, because it's a Photoshop mugshot.
Yeah.
And I tell you this as somebody who has interviewed former President Donald Trump. I'm 6'1". We were the same height. In the picture, they've got him at 6'3", and I was like, yeah, come on. If you're going to Photoshop, at least get the guy's height correct.
Yeah, only lie about things that are relevant. Don't lie about things that aren't important.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, we all are jealous of, juicing up how tall we are.
Yeah.
But no, so politically, I think this does a couple of things. One, obviously, the fundraising. It helps there because it gets his name out there. You wouldn't think name ID is an issue for the 45th president, but it does. It gets his name out there, reminds donors, reminds voters, that, he's out there and he's running. So that obviously redounds to his benefit. And I think more on a political side than anything else, just kind of the raw politique of it. You have to now, if you are running against him in the GOP primary, you're going to have to come out and talk about this. And so you either are going to have to defend him, or you're going to have to give some sort of, answer that tries to split the baby and probably doesn't make anyone real happy. So if you have to come out and defend him as one of his rivals for the nomination, it's not great to be, bolstering and backing up your opponent. So it puts the declared candidates in a bit of a bind going forward with how do they approach this, how full-throated is their denunciation of the Manhattan DA, but then how far do you get into the underlying questions of these payments? And so I think politically it's a much harder nut to crack for those declared candidates and then anybody else who gets into the GOP primary. between now and obviously when we see some resolution here.
All right, last question for you, Chris. I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here. Look into your political magic 8-ball. If you were Team DeSantis right about now, what kind of discussions would you be having?
So far, we've seen the DeSantis political side really try and lay low and let things just kind of go their own way and not directly engage with President Trump or his campaign. I think that's an effective strategy for now, but eventually you're going to have to get out there and mix it up. Obviously, until he declares that he's running for president, he can, kind of hedge those bets. But sooner or later, you got to get out there. And how do you then do you go after former President Trump? Because I don't think in any kind of political race you can beat your opponent by just kind of agreeing with them all the time. You've got to start drawing some lines of distinction, and you've got to start kind of going on the offensive. We'll see how that plays itself out. I think, the conventional wisdom is DeSantis probably won't do anything till the legislative session ends. So at least another 30 days, and we'll see what happens in those 30 days.
Channel 9 Eyewitness News Chief Political Correspondent Christopher Heath. As always, Chris, we appreciate your valued insight and taking the time to share it with our listeners.
Hey, Joe, I appreciate it.
Have a good night. Coming up, don't forget, we will be carrying the President's Address in its entirety tonight. It is scheduled for 8:15. Our live coverage of the President's Address begins at about 8:06. But that will happen tonight here on WDBO. And, of course, anything that you may miss here throughout the day today, tune in first thing tomorrow morning on Orlando's Morning News with Scott Inez. You'll have all the highlights, the lowlights, and everything in between with expert analysis and information tomorrow morning on Orlando's Morning News.
This is a special edition of Orlando's News and Talk with Joe Kelly on WDBO. Donald Trump booked.
Just saw the Florida Man Twitter account, and the headline reads, Florida man faces charges in New York, paid sex worker to not talk dirty. Yeah, that's the gist of it, pretty much, out of Manhattan today. Now, I've got a little bit of a treat for you, a little over a minute long here, but I dipped into the archives here to an old Rush Limbaugh show from January 8th, 2021, in which Rush Limbaugh effectively predicted what would happen today. Take a listen.
I know they desperately want Trump gone, and I know that they desperately want it codified that Trump cannot run again, because make no mistake, they remain scared to death of you, and they remain scared to death of Trump. Trump, 75 million, 80 million votes. And I'm going to tell you, you're not going anywhere. Even if Trump does, you're not. They can't separate you from Trump. And more importantly, they can't separate you from the ideas. They can't separate you from MAGA. They can't separate you from Make America Great Again, which I think remains one of our big campaign strengths going forward. They believe that they can destroy this bond that exists between you and Trump if they somehow make Trump look bad, make Trump look like a reprobate, embarrass you about Trump. They can't do it because you came before Trump.
And that, again, Rush Limbaugh from 2021 predicting pretty much what was going to happen today. And it is. I mean, it is a movement. It's not unlike the Tea Party movement. The Tea Party movement, quick, name the political leaders of the Tea Party movement. It's hard to, without really, going back and rethinking who those Republican leaders were at the time. And frankly, it's not unlike, and forgive me, I don't mean it to this extreme, but it's not unlike ISIS. Defeating ISIS is not the same as defeating an army. It's defeating an ideology. And MAGA is not a person. MAGA has become an ideology. It's so much more than what it once was of just being a person. Now, we are going to, coming up next year on WDBO, we're going to go to our to our regularly scheduled Jimmy Fallon. That'll be coming up next for 1 hour. And then I will be back here with you live at 8 o'clock as the president addresses supporters and the nation from his home down in Mar-A-Lago. You'll be able to hear that in its entirety tonight, beginning at 8 o'clock. The speech, we're told, is going to be at about 8:15, but our live coverage begins tonight at 8 o'clock and a little bit more than an hour from right now. So stay with us here through the next hour of Jimmy Fallon. We'll be back with you live at 8 o'clock, and we'll have the president's address live at 8:15 until all the way through the end. If the president speaks for 30 minutes or if the president speaks for 3 hours, you'll be able to hear it all tonight right here on WDBO.